The children had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by the trauma and stress of the day. Jessica watched over them, her heart breaking as she realized that their childhood innocence had been shattered forever. Whatever happened next, these kids would carry the scars of this day for the rest of their lives. The sunrise brought both hope and horror to the survivors barricaded in the parking garage. The good news was that they had survived the night without losing anyone else to the infection. The bad news was that the situation outside had deteriorated dramatically. The city beyond the mall was now clearly in chaos, with smoke rising from multiple locations and the constant sound of sirens creating an urban apocalypse soundtrack. Dr. Watson had spent the night monitoring the potentially infected individuals, and her worst fears were confirmed when dawn broke. The security guard who had been scratched during his escape began showing symptoms around 5 a.m. First came the fever and disorientation, then the aggression and loss of higher brain function. The transformation was complete within 2 hours. "We need to make a decision about him," Maria Santos said quietly, pulling Dr. Watson aside. "He's becoming dangerous, and we can't risk him turning fully while he's among the others." The ethical dilemma was crushing. The man had been a hero, helping others escape the mall, and now he was paying the price for his courage. But the safety of the 30 other survivors, including 5 children, had to take priority. Dr. Watson made the hardest decision of her medical career. "We'll move him to a secure area," she said finally. "We'll make him as comfortable as possible, but we can't let him endanger the others." Meanwhile, Marcus had been monitoring radio communications throughout the night, trying to piece together the larger picture of what was happening. The reports were fragmentary and often contradictory, but a pattern was emerging. The outbreak was not limited to their mall. Similar incidents were being reported from shopping centers, airports, and other public spaces across the region. "It's coordinated," he told Dr. Watson during a brief strategy meeting. "This isn't random. Someone or something planned this to happen simultaneously in multiple locations. We're dealing with something much bigger than." Marcus Rodriguez had been working security at Westfield Shopping Center for 3 years, and he thought he'd seen everything. Shoplifters, food court fights, lost children crying for their parents. But nothing could have prepared him for what started as an ordinary Saturday afternoon in October. The mall buzzed with its usual weekend energy: families browsing stores, teenagers hanging out by the fountain, elderly couples power walking the corridors before the stores opened. The first sign something was wrong came through his radio at 2:47 p.m. "Marcus, we've got a situation in the food court," crackled the voice of his supervisor, Janet Miller. "Some kind of medical emergency. Customer collapsed, but now she's acting strange. Really strange." Marcus quickened his pace, weaving through clusters of shoppers. As he approached the food court, he noticed people backing away from the central seating area, their faces twisted with concern and confusion. A crowd had formed a loose circle around something he couldn't quite see. The usual chatter and laughter of the food court had been replaced by an unsettling murmur of worried voices. "Excuse me, coming through," Marcus called out, pushing gently through the crowd. What he saw made his blood run cold. A middle-aged woman in a floral dress was hunched over a teenage boy, her movements jerky and unnatural. The boy wasn't moving, and there was blood. A lot of blood. "Ma'am, step away from him," Marcus commanded, his hand instinctively moving to his radio. But the woman didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his presence. Instead, she continued her horrifying feast, making wet, tearing sounds that would haunt Marcus for the rest of his life. Dr. Emily Watson, a pediatrician shopping with her own children, pushed through the crowd. "I'm a doctor," she announced firmly. "Let me help." But as she knelt beside the scene, her medical training couldn't explain what she was witnessing. The woman's skin had taken on a grayish pallor, and her movements were mechanical, almost primal. "Something's very wrong here," Dr. Watson whispered to Marcus, her voice trembling. "This isn't any medical condition I've ever encountered. We need to evacuate this area immediately." Marcus nodded, reaching for his radio again. "Janet, I need mall security and emergency services to the food court now. We have a serious situation that requires immediate attention." but his radio only produced static. The emergency channel was dead. Meanwhile, near the department store entrance, single mother Jessica Thompson was shopping for her 8-year-old son's birthday present when she heard the commotion. She had been laid off from her accounting job 2 months ago, and this shopping trip represented her last bit of savings dedicated to making her son's birthday special. The sounds of screaming and panic made her maternal instincts kick into overdrive. "Something's happening in the food court," a panicked shopper told her. "Some woman went crazy and attacked the kid. People are saying she bit him." Jessica's heart raced as she thought about her son, who was supposed to meet her near the toy store after visiting the arcade. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. The growing sounds of chaos from the food court made her decision easy. She had to find her son. Back in the food court, the situation deteriorated rapidly. The woman had moved on from her first victim and was now stumbling toward other shoppers with that same mechanical gait. Her eyes were vacant, clouded over like milk glass. Dr. Watson tried to approach her professionally, speaking in calm, measured tones. "Ma'am, I'm a doctor. I want to help you. Can you tell me your name?" But the woman's response was a low, guttural growl that raised the hair on everyone's neck. Store manager Robertson had been in retail for 15 years, managing everything from Black Friday stampedes to holiday season meltdowns. He prided himself on maintaining order and keeping customers safe. But as he watched the scene unfold from his office security monitors, he realized this was beyond anything in his experience or training. "Lock down the store," he ordered his assistant manager, David Park. "No one goes in or out until we understand what's happening. And somebody find out why our emergency communications are down." The teenager who had been attacked suddenly jerked upright, his wounds still bleeding freely. But his eyes held that same vacant stare, and his movements matched the woman's unnatural gait. Dr. Watson backed away slowly, her medical knowledge screaming that what she was witnessing was impossible. "This can't be happening," she whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. Something had gone terribly wrong, and it was spreading. The panic spread faster than wildfire through the mall corridors. What had started as curious onlookers in the food court quickly became a stampede of terrified shoppers fleeing in every direction. The infected woman and teenager moved with increasing aggression, their inhuman groans echoing off the polished floors and glass storefronts. Marcus tried to maintain order, but his voice was lost in the chaos of screaming families and slamming security gates. Dr. Watson found herself separated from the crowd, backed against the counter of a closed coffee shop. Her years of medical training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, but nothing had prepared her for this nightmare. The 2 infected individuals were now joined by a third, a mall employee who had tried to help the initial victim. Their numbers were growing, and their hunger seemed insatiable. "We need to get out of here," she called to Marcus, who was trying to guide a family with young children toward the nearest exit. But the main entrances were blocked by the surge of panicking shoppers, creating bottlenecks that only increased the chaos. Jessica Thompson pushed through the crowd, her maternal instincts driving her forward despite the danger. She had to find her son, who was somewhere in this maze of terror. The toy store where they had planned to meet was now shuttered, its metal security gate pulled down tight. She pounded on the gate, calling his name, but there was no response. "Tommy! Tommy, where are you?" she screamed over the din of alarms and shouting. A security guard she didn't recognize grabbed her arm. "Lady, you need to evacuate now," he said urgently. "The whole mall is being compromised. These people, they're not right. They're attacking anyone they can reach." But Jessica shook him off. "My son is in here somewhere. I'm not leaving without him." She spotted an unlocked service door marked "Employees Only" and made a desperate decision. If the main corridors were chaos, maybe the back passages would be safer. Robertson watched helplessly from his office as his orderly shopping center descended into complete pandemonium. The security cameras showed infected individuals spreading throughout the mall like a plague. They moved with purpose, seeking out the living with a hunger that defied explanation. His staff was scattered, some trapped in locked offices, others who had tried to help customers now missing or worse. "David, we need to contact the authorities," he said to his assistant manager, but David was staring at the monitors with horrified fascination. "Look at camera 7, David whispered. "That's Mrs. Henderson from the flower shop. She was just arranging bouquets an hour ago. Now she's—" He couldn't finish the sentence as they watched their colleague attack a customer near the jewelry store. The mall's public address system crackled to life, but instead of Robert's voice, it was Janet Miller from security. "All shoppers and employees, evacuate immediately. This is not a drill. Seek shelter in locked rooms if evacuation is not possible. Avoid contact with anyone exhibiting aggressive or unusual behavior." Dr. Watson had managed to reach a group of survivors who had barricaded themselves in a large department store. Among them were an elderly couple, 2 teenagers who had been shopping for prom dresses, and a young father clutching his infant daughter. The store manager, a woman named Patricia Williams, had acted quickly to secure the entrances. "How many of those things are out there?" Patricia asked, her voice shaking as she peered through the security gate at the chaos beyond. "I counted at least a dozen when I ran in here," replied one of the teenagers. "But there were more people getting attacked. This is like something out of a movie, except it's real." Dr. Watson examined the baby, who was crying from all the commotion. "She seems fine, just scared," she assured the father. "But we need to stay quiet. Those things seem to be attracted to sound and movement." As if summoned by her words, several infected individuals appeared outside the store, their faces pressed against the glass, leaving bloody smears as they searched for a way in. Their movements were coordinated yet primitive, like predators following an instinct they couldn't quite understand. The survivors huddled together in the back of the store, surrounded by mannequins in designer clothing that now seemed absurdly insignificant. Outside, the mall that had been filled with families and laughter just hours before had become a hunting ground for something that shouldn't exist. Jessica Thompson navigated the employee corridors with growing desperation. The service areas were dimly lit and eerily quiet compared to the chaos in the main mall. She could hear the distant sounds of screaming and breaking glass, but back here, the horror felt almost surreal. Her phone had no signal, and the emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the concrete walls. She tried every door she passed, calling out for her son in hushed tones. Most were locked, but she found a few storage rooms and a break room where employees had apparently abandoned their lunches mid-bite. The normalcy of half-eaten sandwiches and still-warm coffee made this situation even more disturbing. "Tommy, please, if you can hear me," she whispered as she approached what looked like a maintenance area. That's when she heard a faint tapping sound coming from behind a heavy metal door marked "Electrical Room Authorized Personnel Only." "Mom?" The voice was weak but unmistakable. Jessica's heart nearly burst with relief as she tried the door handle. It was locked, but she could hear her son's voice more clearly now. "Tommy, honey, it's me. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" She pressed her ear against the door, trying to assess his condition. "I'm scared, Mom. There's something wrong with people out there. I saw them through the window, and they were hurting someone. The arcade guy told us to hide, but then he started screaming." Tommy's voice was shaking, and Jessica could hear other children with him. "How many of you are in there?" she asked, already looking around for something to break the lock. "5 of us. Me, Sarah, Michael, and the Peterson twins. We can't get out, and we don't know what happened to Mr. Rodriguez." Mr. Rodriguez was the arcade manager, a kind man who had always looked out for the kids. Jessica found a fire axe in an emergency case and made the difficult decision to break the lock. The sound echoed through the corridor, and she prayed it wouldn't attract attention. When the door swung open, she was greeted by 5 terrified children, all between 8 and 12 years old, huddled together in the cramped electrical room. Meanwhile, Marcus had managed to reach the mall's security office, but what he found there made his blood run cold. Janet Miller was slumped over her desk, and she wasn't moving. Her radio lay beside her, covered in blood. As he approached cautiously, she suddenly lifted her head, revealing the same vacant stare and gray pallor that had marked the others. "Janet," he called out, but she responded with that same inhuman growl. Marcus backed away as his supervisor and colleague of 3 years lunged at him with mechanical precision. He managed to slam the office door just in time, trapping her inside, but now he was cut off from the security controls and communication systems. The main mall corridors had become a maze of overturned benches, scattered shopping bags, and broken glass. The infected moved through the space with increasing coordination, as if they were learning to hunt together. Some survivors had managed to barricade themselves in stores, while others had fled to the upper levels or parking structures. Dr. Watson and her group of survivors in the department store were running low on options. The infected had figured out how to manipulate door handles and were systematically testing every entrance. The security gate was holding, but they could hear the metal beginning to strain under the constant pressure. "We need another way out," whispered Patricia Williams, the store manager. "There's a service elevator that goes to the loading dock. If we can get there quietly, we might be able to escape." The elderly couple, George and Martha Hamilton, had been married for 43 years and had weathered many storms together. Martha clutched her husband's hand as they moved through the store, past displays of jewelry and perfume that now seemed like artifacts from another world. "George, I'm scared," she whispered. "What if this is how it ends for us? What if we never see our grandchildren again?" George squeezed her hand. "We're going to get through this, Martha. We've survived worse than this." But privately, he wasn't sure that was true. Nothing in their long life together had prepared them for this nightmare. The young father, Daniel Murphy, held his infant daughter close to his chest. She had finally stopped crying, exhausted from the stress and chaos. He had been shopping for baby clothes when the outbreak began, and now he was fighting for both their lives. His wife was at work across town, and he had no way to contact her or know if she was safe. "The elevator is just past the cosmetics counter," Patricia explained to the group. "But we'll be exposed for about 30 seconds while we cross the store. Those things seem to be attracted to movement and sound, so we need to move fast and quiet." Dr. Watson checked her watch. It had been less than 2 hours since the first incident in the food court, but it felt like days. The speed at which the infection was spreading defied everything she understood about disease transmission and human behavior. The group prepared for their desperate escape attempt. Patricia Williams had worked at the mall for 12 years and knew every shortcut, every service corridor, every emergency exit. But the familiar layout now seemed like a death trap, with infected individuals scattered throughout the shopping center like landmines waiting to explode. "Remember, stay low, stay quiet, and whatever happens, don't stop moving," she whispered to the group. The elderly couple nodded grimly, while the teenagers clutched each other's hands. Daniel Murphy adjusted his grip on his baby daughter, making sure she was secure against his chest. They moved in single file through the store, weaving between clothing racks and display cases. The sound of their footsteps seemed impossibly loud on the polished floor, and every creak and rustle made them freeze in terror. Through the store's windows, they could see infected individuals wandering the main corridors, their movements becoming more organized and purposeful. Dr. Watson noticed something that chilled her to the bone. The infected weren't just randomly attacking anymore. They were working together, herding survivors toward dead ends, communicating through their guttural sounds in ways that suggested a primitive intelligence. This wasn't just mindless hunger, it was strategic hunting. As they approached the service elevator, a new sound reached their ears: the wail of emergency sirens outside the mall. Help was coming, but would it arrive in time? The elevator doors stood open, but the space beyond was dark and uncertain. "The power might be out," Patricia whispered. "We might have to use the stairs." That's when they heard a child's scream echoing through the mall's corridors. It was coming from the direction of the employee areas, where Jessica Thompson had found the children hiding in the electrical room. The scream was followed by running footsteps and the unmistakable sounds of pursuit. Meanwhile, Jessica was leading the 5 children through the maze of service corridors, trying to reach one of the emergency exits. But the infected had discovered their hiding place, and now they were being hunted through the back areas of the mall. Tommy stayed close to his mother, but the other children were struggling to keep up. "This way," Jessica called out, remembering the layout from her years of shopping here. The employee parking garage has an exit that leads directly outside. But as they turned a corner, they came face to face with 3 infected individuals who had somehow gotten ahead of them. The infected were former mall employees, still wearing their name tags and uniforms, but their faces were masks of hunger and decay. They moved with coordinated precision, blocking the corridor and forcing Jessica and the children to retreat. "Back, back!" Jessica shouted, pushing the children behind her. "Find another way!" But the children were panicking, and their cries of terror were attracting more infected individuals. The service corridors that had seemed like a safe haven were now becoming a trap. Marcus, still moving through the mall's security areas, heard the commotion and recognized the voices. He had to make a choice: continue trying to reach the central security office to call for help, or try to rescue the children and their mother. His training told him to prioritize the bigger picture, but his conscience wouldn't let him abandon innocent kids. He grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and headed toward the sounds of struggle. The service corridors were narrow, which meant the infected couldn't surround him easily, but it also meant he had no room to maneuver if things went wrong. Robert Chen, still trapped in his office with David Park, watched the security monitors in horror as the situation continued to deteriorate. The infected now outnumbered the survivors, and they were showing signs of increasingly sophisticated behavior. Some were using tools, others were problem-solving their way through barricades. "We need to get out of here," David said, pointing to the monitors. "They're learning. Look at how they're moving now. It's like they're developing tactics." Robert nodded grimly. The mall had become a war zone, and they were losing. Through his office window, he could see emergency vehicles arriving outside, but the responders had no idea what they were walking into. The infected were waiting for them, drawn by the sounds of sirens and shouting. The situation was about to get much worse. The mall's enclosed environment had allowed the infection to spread rapidly, but now it was about to spill out into the wider community. The first responders, unaware of the true nature of the threat, were walking into a trap that could spread the outbreak throughout the entire city. As the afternoon wore on, the mall became a microcosm of societal collapse, with survivors making impossible choices between self-preservation and helping others. The infection showed no signs of slowing, and the building that had once been a symbol of community and commerce was now a monument to humanity's darkest nightmare. Marcus reached the intersection where Jessica and the children were trapped just as the infected closed in. Without hesitation, he discharged the fire extinguisher directly at the nearest infected individual, the chemical cloud temporarily blinding and disorienting them. The distraction gave Jessica and the children precious seconds to escape down a side corridor. "This way!" Marcus shouted, leading them toward an emergency exit he knew was usually unlocked. The children followed, their small legs working frantically to keep up with the adults. Behind them, the infected recovered quickly from the chemical spray and resumed their relentless pursuit. The emergency exit led to a loading dock area, but as they burst through the door, they were greeted by chaos in the parking lot. The first responders had arrived, but they were unprepared for what they encountered. Police officers and paramedics were trying to help people who appeared to be injured, not realizing that these victims were actually infected and dangerous. "Don't touch them!" Dr. Watson screamed from across the parking lot, where she and her group had finally managed to escape through the service elevator. "They're infected. They'll attack you." But her warning came too late. A paramedic who had been trying to treat what appeared to be an injured shopper suddenly found himself under attack. The infected woman he was trying to help turned on him with savage fury, and within moments, another vector of infection was created. The parking lot became a second battlefield as the infection spread among the first responders. Police officers, trained to serve and protect, found themselves firing on what appeared to be civilians. The moral complexity of the situation created hesitation that cost lives, as officers struggled to understand what they were facing. Jessica gathered the children around her, trying to shield them from the horror unfolding around them. "Don't look," she told them, but the sounds of conflict were impossible to ignore. Her son Tommy clung to her leg, while the other children huddled together in terror. "We need to get to the parking garage," Marcus said, pointing to the multi-level structure adjacent to the mall. We can barricade ourselves on one of the upper levels until this gets sorted out. But the garage was not the safe haven they had hoped for. Other survivors had the same idea, and the confined space was becoming overcrowded with panicked people. Arguments broke out over resources, space, and escape routes. The stress of the situation was breaking down social cohesion, and desperate people were making dangerous decisions. Dr. Watson found herself serving as a de facto leader among the survivors, her medical training providing some authority in the chaos. She had managed to gather about 30 people on the third level of the parking garage, including families with children, elderly individuals, and several mall employees. "We need to organize," she announced to the group. "We need to establish security, share resources, and find a way to communicate with the outside world. The infection appears to be spreading rapidly, but it's not airborne. Physical contact seems to be the primary vector." Among the survivors was Maria Santos, a nurse who had been shopping for her daughter's quinceañera dress. She had witnessed the initial outbreak in the food court and had managed to escape through sheer luck. Her medical knowledge, combined with Dr. Watson's, provided the group with valuable insights about their situation. "I've never seen anything like this," Maria whispered to Dr. Watson. "The speed of transmission, the behavioral changes, the apparent loss of higher brain function while maintaining motor skills, it's like something out of a science fiction movie." Meanwhile, Robert Chen and David Park had finally abandoned their office and were making their way through the mall's administrative areas. They had access to the building's infrastructure systems and were trying to use the emergency broadcast system to warn people throughout the city. "If this spreads beyond the mall," Roberts said grimly, "it could affect thousands of people. We need to get word out about the nature of the threat. People need to know that these aren't just sick individuals, they're dangerous." The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot where emergency vehicles continued to arrive. But instead of containing the situation, each wave of responders seemed to make it worse. The infection was spreading outward from the mall like ripples in a pond, affecting the surrounding shopping district and residential areas. From their vantage point on the parking garage, the survivors could see the scope of the disaster expanding. Smoke was rising from several locations, suggesting that the chaos had led to fires. The sounds of sirens were constant now, creating an urban symphony of disaster. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Watson said quietly, watching the scene unfold below. "If we don't find a way to stop this, it's going to spread throughout the entire city." The reality of their situation was becoming clear. This wasn't just a mall emergency anymore. It was the start of something much larger and more terrifying. As darkness fell over the shopping center, the situation became increasingly desperate. The parking garage survivors had established a crude perimeter using shopping carts and debris, but their defenses were minimal against the growing number of infected individuals wandering the area. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting eerie shadows that made it difficult to distinguish between survivors and threats. Jessica Thompson had found a quiet corner where she could comfort the children, but their situation was becoming untenable. The kids were hungry, thirsty, and traumatized by the events of the day. The Peterson twins, normally inseparable, were now clinging to each other with the desperation of children who had seen too much. Tommy kept asking when they could go home, and Jessica had no answer for him. "Mrs. Thompson," whispered Sarah, one of the older children, "are we going to die here?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence, and Jessica struggled to find words that would provide comfort without being dishonest. "We're going to find a way out of this," she said finally. "The adults are working on a plan." But privately, she was beginning to doubt that anyone really knew what to do. Dr. Watson and Maria Santos had been moving through the group of survivors, checking on injuries and trying to maintain morale. They had identified several people who might have been exposed to the infection, including a security guard who had been scratched during his escape from the mall. The ethical dilemma was crushing. Should they isolate these potentially infected individuals, or was that a betrayal of their duty to care for everyone? "We need to make some hard decisions," Maria said quietly. "If any of these people are incubating the infection, they could turn at any moment. We could lose everything we've built here." The debate about quarantine was interrupted by a new crisis. A group of infected individuals had managed to reach the ground floor of the parking garage and were making their way up the ramp. Their movements were more coordinated now, suggesting that the infection was continuing to evolve and adapt. Marcus took charge of the defense, organizing the able-bodied survivors into teams. They had improvised weapons from mall shopping carts, tools from maintenance areas, and whatever else they could find. But facing down infected humans felt fundamentally different from any other kind of emergency. These had been shoppers, employees, and community members just hours before. "Remember, they're not the people they used to be," Marcus told the defenders. "The infection has taken everything that made them human. You're not fighting people anymore, you're fighting the disease." The first wave of infected reached the third level just as the survivors finished their hasty preparations. The battle was brief but intense, with the narrow confines of the parking garage creating a choke point that worked in the survivors' favor. But the victory came at a cost. Several defenders were injured, and the noise of the conflict attracted more infected individuals from the surrounding area. Meanwhile, outside the immediate area of the mall, the infection was spreading through the city with terrifying speed. Emergency services were overwhelmed, and the normal infrastructure of society was beginning to break down. Phone lines were jammed, hospitals were overcrowded, and government officials were struggling to understand the scope of the crisis. Robert Chen had managed to reach the mall's main communication center and was broadcasting warnings on every available channel. "This is Robert Chen, manager of Westfield Shopping Center. We have a medical emergency that has spread beyond our facility. The infected individuals are extremely dangerous and should not be approached. They appear to be driven by aggressive instincts and will attack anyone they encounter. Do not attempt to help them. Maintain distance and seek shelter immediately." His broadcasts were being picked up by local news stations, but the information was fragmentary and confusing. Reports were coming in from across the city about similar incidents, suggesting that the mall outbreak was not an isolated event but part of a larger catastrophe. Dr. Watson found herself thinking about the broader implications of what they were witnessing. The speed and efficiency of the infection suggested it was not naturally occurring. The coordinated behavior of the infected, their apparent ability to learn and adapt, and the rapid spread all pointed to something that had been engineered rather than evolved. "This isn't random," she told Maria during a brief moment of quiet. "Someone or something caused this. The question is whether it was intentional or accidental." As the night wore on, the survivors faced a terrible choice: stay in the relative safety of the parking garage and hope for rescue, or try to escape the area before the infection spread further. Each option carried enormous risks, and the wrong decision could mean death for everyone they were trying to protect. The children had finally fallen asleep, exhausted by the trauma and stress of the day. Jessica watched over them, her heart breaking as she realized that their childhood innocence had been shattered forever. Whatever happened next, these kids would carry the scars of this day for the rest of their lives.